Every Wednesday at 3:17 in the afternoon, Lucy Bell heard the westbound train whistle beyond the cottonwoods, and every Wednesday she looked through the ticket window for the same man. Caleb Rowan was always standing beneath the depot clock before the train appeared. He never carried luggage. He never bought a ticket. He never waved when the locomotive rounded the bend. He simply stood there in his dark work coat, one hand resting on the railing, watching every passenger step down onto the platform as if he expected one particular face among them. And every Wednesday, after the conductor shouted the final call and the train pulled away toward the mountains, Caleb went home alone. Lucy had watched this happen for nearly a year. At 26, she had become accustomed to noticing things other people missed. It was part of her work. The railroad called her a telegraph operator, though in Larkspur Junction that meant she also sold tickets, balanced freight ledgers, kept track of mail sacks, settled arguments over delivery dates, and occasionally informed impatient cattlemen that shouting at a timetable did not make a locomotive travel faster. She had a quick mind for numbers and an even quicker memory for people. She could remember who preferred an aisle seat, whose mother lived in Cheyenne, which ranchers paid their freight bills late, and which traveling salesmen lied about the weight of their trunks. She remembered Caleb Rowan for different reasons. He was 34, broad-shouldered and quiet, with sun-darkened skin and the kind of calm that made louder men seem foolish beside him. He owned a modest horse ranch several miles north of town and had a reputation for rescuing animals other ranchers considered ruined. People said he could stand beside a frightened mare for an hour without touching her, until she decided for herself that he meant no harm. Lucy believed it. Caleb treated people much the same way. He never crowded anyone, never raised his voice, never stayed where he thought he was unwanted. And every Wednesday he waited for someone who did not come. Lucy had asked him about it exactly once. It had been early spring, before she had learned that Caleb Rowan could make silence feel less like an absence and more like a boundary. "Expecting somebody today, Mr. Rowan?" He had looked toward the tracks. Maybe. That was all. After that, Lucy did not ask again. But she noticed. She noticed that he always arrived 10 minutes early. She noticed that he checked the faces of older women first, then younger ones. She noticed that when children came down from the train, his expression softened for half a second before closing again. She noticed the small cedar box he sometimes carried inside his coat, and she noticed that on the rare Wednesday when bad weather delayed the train, Caleb waited until the station lamps were lit before accepting that no one was coming. Lucy told herself it was professional curiosity. She knew it was not entirely true. There was something about a person who returned week after week to the same disappointment that made her wonder what sort of promise could be stronger than humiliation. Still, she had her own life to manage. Her mother had died when Lucy was 16. Her father, Edwin Bell, had raised her afterward with more books than dresses and had taught her Morse code before most girls in town were allowed to manage household accounts. When he died suddenly 4 years later, Lucy inherited very little except debts, a brass telegraph key, and his stubborn conviction that her mind belonged to her. She had kept all three. The debts were gone now. The telegraph key sat on her desk, and her mind had earned her a place in a profession that some men still considered unsuitable for a woman. Lucy was beautiful, though she had never found beauty particularly useful. Her dark hair was usually pinned neatly at the back of her head. Her gray-green eyes had a way of becoming very still when she was thinking, which made careless men nervous. Travelers remembered her face, but townspeople remembered something else. Lucy Bell usually knew the answer. If a shipment vanished, she found it. If a telegram arrived garbled, she reconstructed it. If the station agent drank too much the night before, Lucy quietly ran the depot until he recovered. She had built a respectable life out of competence. She was proud of that. She was also, though she rarely admitted it even to herself, lonely. Not desperately lonely, not tragically lonely. Her loneliness was orderly. It lived in the small rented house behind the mercantile, in the second coffee cup she never used, in the books she finished without anyone asking what she thought of them. She had become skilled at living alone. Then came the blizzard of 1896. Snow began before dawn on a Wednesday and buried the tracks by noon. The railroad telegraphed that the westbound train had stopped 20 miles east and would remain there until crews cleared the line. By 2 o'clock, the depot was crowded with stranded travelers. By 3, the wind was strong enough to rattle the windows. And at 3:07, exactly 10 minutes before the train that would not arrive, Caleb Rowan walked through the door. Lucy looked up from her telegraph desk. His coat was white with snow. "You know it's canceled," she said. "I know. Then why are you here?" Caleb removed his hat. "I thought you might need help." Lucy stared at him. Behind her, 2 children were crying. An elderly woman had taken possession of the only chair near the stove. A traveling preacher was explaining to everyone that the storm was an excellent opportunity to practice Christian patience while demonstrating very little of it himself. Lucy glanced around. "I might." Caleb nodded once. "What needs doing?" That afternoon changed something. Not suddenly. Nothing between Lucy Bell and Caleb Rowan ever happened suddenly. But by nightfall, the depot had become a shelter. Caleb brought firewood from the freight shed. He repaired a broken latch that had allowed snow to blow beneath the north door. When one of the stranded children developed a fever, he rode through the storm to fetch Dr. Mercer. Lucy tried to stop him. "The road is nearly gone." "I know the road. You could freeze." He gave her the faintest hint of a smile. "Then keep the stove going." He returned 2 hours later with the doctor behind him. The child recovered. By midnight, most of the passengers were asleep on benches or wrapped in blankets on the floor. Lucy sat behind the ticket counter, finishing a message to the railroad office. Her fingers were stiff from tapping the telegraph key. Caleb placed a cup of coffee beside her. She looked up. "You found coffee?" "I found a woman traveling to Salt Lake who considers coffee a medical necessity. Then we owe her our lives." "That's what she said." Lucy smiled. Caleb leaned against the counter. For the first time, there was no train arriving and no reason for him to leave. The question Lucy had kept for nearly a year returned. She did not ask it. Instead, she said, "You're good in a crisis. So are you. I get paid for it." "Not enough." She laughed softly. Caleb looked surprised. "What?" "Nothing." "You looked surprised. I've never heard you laugh." Lucy lifted an eyebrow. "You've hardly heard me speak." "That's not true." She stopped. Caleb glanced toward the sleeping travelers. "I hear you every Wednesday." Something small moved between them. Not romance. Not yet. Recognition. The storm kept them there until morning. Before Caleb left, he placed his hat on his head and looked toward the empty tracks. Lucy followed his gaze. "You knew the train wasn't coming," she said. "Yes, but you came anyway." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I suppose Wednesday has become a habit." He walked into the snow before she could answer. The following Wednesday, the trains were running again. Caleb arrived at 3:07. Lucy had his coffee waiting. She pretended that was an accident. He pretended to believe her. The train came. No one he knew stepped down. He stayed 10 minutes afterward. The Wednesday after that, he stayed 20. By February, he had begun arriving early enough to help Lucy move mail sacks. By March, he knew that she hated raisins, preferred the evening newspaper to the morning one, and kept a novel hidden beneath the freight ledger for quiet hours. Lucy learned that Caleb disliked card games, had an unreasonable affection for apple pie, and could name every horse on his ranch from half a mile away. Their conversations were never dramatic. They spoke in pieces. A remark about the weather, a complaint about a stubborn customer, a story about a horse, a question about a book. Then, one Wednesday, Lucy found a newspaper folded beside her telegraph key. An article had been marked in pencil. It concerned a woman in Nebraska who had been appointed manager of a small railroad station. Lucy read it twice. When Caleb arrived, she held up the paper. "Did you leave this?" "Maybe. That is becoming a troublesome word with you." He looked almost embarrassed. "I thought you'd find it interesting." "You read an article about female railroad employees?" "I read the newspaper." "You circled it." That part seemed important. Lucy studied him. Most men in Larkspur Junction tolerated her work as if it were an eccentricity she would eventually outgrow. Caleb had never once asked when she intended to marry and give it up. She folded the newspaper carefully. "Thank you." He nodded. Neither said anything more. But Lucy kept the clipping. As spring softened the Wyoming plains, Caleb began looking for Lucy before he looked toward the tracks. She noticed that, too. What she did not know was that he had been noticing her almost as long. He knew the exact moment she became frustrated because she tapped her pencil twice against the desk. He knew that she tucked loose hair behind her left ear when she was reading something difficult. He knew she always gave children their tickets directly, rather than handing them to their parents, because she liked the way they stood taller when entrusted with something important. He knew she stayed late on Thursdays to send free messages for families who could not afford the telegraph fee when someone was sick. He had never told her that he knew. Caleb was practiced at leaving important things unsaid. 7 years earlier, his younger sister Maggie had left the Rowan ranch after an argument with their father. Caleb had been 27, Maggie had been 19. Their father was a hard man with strict ideas about obedience. Maggie had wanted to marry a railroad fireman named Joseph Lane. Their father refused to permit it. There had been shouting. There had been a door slammed hard enough to crack the frame. Maggie had packed a small bag and left before dawn. Caleb had followed her to the station. She had been crying. He had been angry. Not with her, he told himself. With the situation. With their father. With Joseph. With the whole foolish world. But anger rarely bothers to explain whom it belongs to. "You'll regret this," Caleb had told her. Maggie had stepped onto the train. Maybe. Those had been the last words they spoke. Months later, a letter came from Omaha. Maggie said she and Joseph were married. Their father burned the letter. Caleb remembered the flames. He remembered doing nothing. Then their father died. Caleb wrote to the Omaha address. The letter returned. He tried again. Another came back. Years passed. Then, the previous summer, Caleb received a short letter with no return address. It was in Maggie's handwriting. "Caleb, I don't know if home is still home to me. I heard father is gone. Maybe someday I'll come west again. If I do, it will be on a Wednesday train. I remember that was market day. You always went to town, Maggie." So Caleb waited, every Wednesday. Not because Maggie had promised to come, because he had failed to ask her to stay. Lucy knew none of this until a warm afternoon in May. The train was late. Caleb stood beside the ticket window while Lucy sorted correspondence. A mailbag had arrived from Nebraska. One envelope slipped from the stack and landed near his boot. Caleb bent to pick it up. At the same moment, the cedar box inside his coat fell open. A faded red ribbon landed on the floor. Lucy saw a name written inside the lid. Margaret Rowan. Caleb closed the box quickly. Lucy looked away. "I'm sorry." "No need." The train whistle sounded in the distance. Caleb did not move toward the platform. For once, he seemed tired of pretending. "My sister," he said. Lucy turned back. He told her. Not everything, but enough. When he finished, the train had arrived and departed. Neither noticed until the platform was empty. "You've waited every Wednesday for 7 years?" "Not 7. I got her letter last summer, and she said she was definitely coming?" "No." Lucy considered this. "Then you've spent nearly a year waiting for a possibility." Caleb's jaw tightened. "I suppose that sounds foolish." "It sounds painful." He looked at her. Most people had told him he was wasting his time. Lucy did not. She touched the corner of the mail ledger. "Do you still have the Omaha address?" Caleb nodded. "Give it to me." "Why?" "Because the railroad has offices in Omaha, and telegraph operators know people." "Lucy, I am not promising anything. I didn't ask you to." "I know." That was why she wanted to help. Over the next several weeks, Lucy sent inquiries along the railroad lines. She contacted Omaha, then Lincoln, then Kansas City. She located an old employment record for Joseph Lane. He had worked on 3 different railroads. Each clue led somewhere else. Caleb never pressured her. Every Wednesday he came. Every Wednesday he asked only, "Any word?" Every Wednesday, until June, Lucy answered, "Not yet." Meanwhile, the rest of the town had begun noticing something else. Caleb Rowan no longer left immediately after the train. He sometimes remained until supper. He repaired the loose boards on Lucy's porch. She began borrowing horses from his ranch on Sundays. Once, after Lucy insisted she knew how to saddle a mare, Caleb watched her put the blanket on backward. He waited until she finished. "You're smiling," Lucy said. "No, you are. I wouldn't. Caleb Rowan, if you don't tell me what I've done wrong, I will ride this animal into town exactly as she stands." That ended his resistance. He laughed. It was a deep, warm sound Lucy had never heard before. She thought about it for the rest of the day. Then Henry Caldwell came to Larkspur Junction. Henry was 31, educated, polished, and newly appointed assistant superintendent for the Union Western Railroad. He came to inspect the station. Within 1 hour, he understood what Lucy's own station agent had failed to appreciate in 4 years. She was running most of the operation. Henry watched her resolve a freight dispute, reconstruct a damaged telegram, and reorganize a schedule while 3 men attempted to interrupt her. That evening, he asked her to dinner. Lucy accepted. By the end of the week, Henry had offered her a position in Denver, assistant operations clerk, triple her salary, a private office, a future in railroad management. It was everything Lucy had once imagined wanting. It also meant leaving Larkspur Junction. She had 30 days to decide. Caleb learned about it from the blacksmith. On Wednesday, he came to the depot earlier than usual. Lucy was standing outside with Henry. Henry was holding a leather folder. Lucy was smiling. Caleb stopped before they saw him. He watched Henry say something that made her laugh. The feeling that went through him was immediate and unwelcome. It was not anger. Henry Caldwell had done nothing wrong. By every reasonable measure, he was the sort of man Lucy should consider. He was intelligent. He respected her work. He could offer her a larger life. Caleb looked at the dirt beneath his boots. He had spent a year waiting for someone from his past to step from a train. Now the woman who had quietly become the best part of his present might leave on one. Lucy saw him. "Caleb." He walked forward. Henry extended his hand. "Mr. Rowan, I've heard about your horses." Caleb shook it. "Mr. Caldwell." Henry glanced toward Lucy. "I'll let you consider the offer." When he left, Caleb looked at the folder. "Denver?" Lucy nodded. "It's a serious position. You'd be good at it." Something in her face changed. "That's all you have to say?" Caleb was caught off guard. "What should I say?" "I don't know." Neither did she. That was the problem. The train arrived. Caleb watched the passengers. Lucy watched Caleb. For the first time, she felt angry at Maggie Rowan, though she had never met her. Caleb could stand on a platform every week, waiting for a sister who had offered him nothing but uncertainty. Yet when Lucy stood 3 feet away with a decision that might take her hundreds of miles from him, he could not find a single reason for her to stay. She went back inside. Caleb remained on the platform long after the train departed. The next Wednesday, Lucy did not prepare coffee, Caleb noticed. She hated that he noticed. Their conversation was polite. That was worse than silence. The week after, Henry returned from Denver. He brought papers. He also brought Lucy a pair of fine gloves. "They'll be practical in the city," he said. Lucy thanked him. Caleb saw the gloves on her desk. That evening he went home and sat alone at his kitchen table. The cedar box lay before him. He opened it. Inside were Maggie's ribbon, her letter, and 3 envelopes that had been returned unopened. For years, Caleb had believed waiting proved love. Perhaps sometimes it did. But as he read Maggie's uncertain words again, another thought came to him. Maybe he had confused waiting with courage. Waiting had required nothing from him. No risk, no rejection, no answer. He could stand beneath the depot clock and tell himself he was loyal because the person he was waiting for was never there to challenge him. Lucy was different. Lucy was real. She could say no. She could choose Denver. She could choose Henry. She could look directly at Caleb and ask for something he had forgotten how to give. A reason. He lowered his head into his hands. He remembered his sister on the station platform 7 years earlier. He remembered the anger in his own voice. He remembered the words he had not said. Don't go. I understand. I am your brother. Whatever father says, you will still have me. He had missed that chance. Now, another train was coming. Caleb stood so abruptly his chair scraped across the floor. The following Wednesday, Lucy received a telegram shortly after noon. She read it once. Then again, her hands began to tremble. She folded the message and placed it in her pocket. At 3:07, Caleb did not appear. Lucy looked toward the road. 3:10, nothing. 3:14, still nothing. The old ache of disappointment surprised her with its force. She told herself his absence should not matter. Then she looked at Henry's Denver papers beside her desk. 3:16. The whistle sounded. Lucy stepped onto the platform. The train rolled in beneath a cloud of smoke. Passengers descended. A ranch family. 2 soldiers. A salesman. An elderly couple. A young mother carrying a sleeping baby. No Caleb. The conductor called for boarding. Lucy touched the telegram in her pocket. She had imagined handing it to him. Instead, she watched the train prepare to leave. Perhaps, she thought, this was her answer. People could care for one another and still fail to arrive at the right moment. The locomotive began to move. Then Lucy heard hoofbeats. Caleb came down the road at a gallop. He pulled his horse to a stop so hard the animal threw dust across the platform. Lucy stared. Caleb jumped down. His shirt sleeve was torn. His hair was windblown. He looked nothing like the careful, quiet man who usually arrived 10 minutes early. You're late, she said. I know. You have never been late. I know. Why are you bleeding? Caleb looked at his arm as if he had forgotten it existed. Fence. What? Long story. The train disappeared around the bend. For the first time in nearly a year, Caleb did not even look at it. He looked only at Lucy. I don't want you to go to Denver. The words were so direct that she forgot every reply she had prepared during the previous 3 weeks. Caleb took a breath. I know I have no right to ask you to give up something you've earned. Lucy's expression hardened slightly. Then don't. I'm not. She waited. I don't want you to stay because you're afraid to leave. And I don't want you to stay because I need someone to keep my house, or cook my meals, or save me from being alone. His voice shook, but he continued. I want you to stay only if the life we might build matters to you as much as the one waiting in Denver. Lucy said nothing. Caleb reached into his coat. He removed a long, narrow wooden box. I made this. Lucy accepted it. Inside was a telegraph key. Not the standard brass model supplied by the railroad. This one had a polished walnut base and a smooth ivory-colored handle. Her initials had been carved carefully into one corner, LB. Lucy touched them with one finger. The handle on your key is cracked, Caleb said. You wrap cloth around it when you work long shifts. She looked up. He had noticed. Of course he had. I started making this before I knew about Denver, he continued. Then I stopped because I thought maybe giving it to you would be selfish. And now? Now I think not giving it to you would be cowardly. Lucy almost smiled. Almost. Caleb stepped closer. For years, I thought the most faithful thing I could do was wait for someone who might come back. Then you stood beside me every Wednesday, and somehow I failed to understand that a person can spend so much time watching the horizon that he doesn't see what's already beside him. Lucy's eyes filled, though she refused to look away. I don't know what your life should be, he said. You're too smart for me to decide that for you, but I know what I want mine to be, he swallowed. I want Wednesdays and Thursdays. I want to hear you complain about freight invoices. I want newspapers with things circled, because you think I ought to learn something. I want to know which book you're hiding under the ledger. I want to build you a room with enough windows to read in. A tear escaped down Lucy's cheek. Caleb saw it and lost the last of his composure. I love you, Lucy. The words came out rough, plain, true. I should have said it sooner. Yes, she whispered. His face fell. Then Lucy laughed through her tears. I mean, yes, you should have said it sooner. Caleb stared. Lucy reached into her pocket. I have something for you. She handed him the telegram. He unfolded it. Western Union Office, St. Joseph, Missouri. Margaret Rowan Lane located. Residing with husband Joseph and 3 children. Requests correspondence. Letter to follow. Caleb read it again. His hand began to shake. Maggie? Lucy nodded. Alive? Alive. With children? 3. For a moment, Caleb could not speak. Then he covered his eyes. Lucy stepped toward him. Caleb lowered his hand. I don't know how to thank you. You don't have to. I do. No. She touched the telegram. You waited for your sister because you loved her. I only helped your message find the right road. Caleb looked toward the empty track. For nearly a year, every train had carried disappointment. Now, Maggie had not returned on a train at all. She had returned in 15 words tapped across hundreds of miles of wire. Caleb laughed softly, almost in disbelief. Then he looked at Lucy. What about Denver? She took a slow breath. I haven't decided. His relief disappeared, but he nodded. All right. Lucy studied him. That's it? I said I wouldn't ask you to make yourself smaller for me. For the first time, Lucy smiled fully. Henry offered me another possibility this morning. Caleb waited. The railroad wants a permanent station agent here. He blinked. Here? I told him Larkspur Junction is growing and that the current agent spends too much time sleeping in his office. Accurate. I also told him I was already doing the work. Also accurate. He agreed. Caleb's expression slowly changed. So you're staying? If I accept. Will you? Lucy looked down at the telegraph key he had made. I believe I will. Caleb smiled. Lucy held up one finger. That is not because of you. Of course not. The salary is better. Naturally, I'll be in charge. As you should be. And I intend to keep working if I ever marry. Caleb's smile deepened. I would expect nothing less. Lucy narrowed her eyes. Ever marry? He repeated. You said it. I heard you. The boldness that had carried Caleb across a broken fence and half the county appeared to abandon him. Lucy took pity on him. A man might begin by asking permission to call on a woman somewhere other than a railroad station. Caleb cleared his throat. Would you permit that? I might. Tomorrow? That seems rather soon for a man who took a year to speak plainly. Friday, then. Lucy smiled. Friday. Their courtship did not become dramatic simply because they had finally admitted what everyone else in Larkspur Junction already suspected. Caleb remained quiet. Lucy remained stubborn. They argued over books. He taught her to judge horses. She taught him enough Morse code to recognize his own name. Maggie's first letter arrived 2 weeks later. Caleb read it at Lucy's kitchen table. He cried. Lucy pretended not to notice until he reached for her hand. By autumn, letters traveled regularly between Wyoming and Missouri. In November, Maggie arrived with her husband and children. Not on a Wednesday, on a Monday. Caleb laughed about that for years. He met her on the platform. Lucy watched from the ticket window as brother and sister stood facing each other after 7 years apart. Neither seemed to know what to say. Then Maggie struck Caleb once on the shoulder. He pulled her into his arms. They both wept. Lucy turned away to give them privacy, Maggie noticed. Later that evening, she cornered Caleb outside Lucy's house. Is that her? Caleb knew exactly what she meant. Yes. Does she know? Know what? Maggie rolled her eyes. You haven't changed as much as I hoped. Caleb proposed to Lucy 3 weeks later. He did not choose the depot. Lucy had informed him that asking a woman to marry beside a railway timetable lacked imagination. Instead, he took her to a rise overlooking his ranch at sunset. He had begun building something there. A house. Not a finished house. Not even close. 4 walls stood beneath an open sky. Lucy walked through the empty doorway. What is this? Possibly a mistake. She laughed. Caleb pointed. Your office would be there. My office? South windows. Better light. Lucy turned toward him. And if I say no, I'll have an unusually well-lit storage room. She shook her head. Caleb took both her hands. I cannot promise you an easy life. I wouldn't believe you if you did. I can promise I will never ask you to stop being the woman you are." Her expression softened. "And I can promise that when I am foolish, which Maggie assures me will happen regularly, I will try not to remain foolish longer than necessary." An ambitious promise. "I've been practicing." Lucy smiled. Caleb became serious. "Will you build this life with me?" She looked through the unfinished walls toward the plains. For years, Lucy had believed choosing love might mean surrendering independence. Caleb had never asked for surrender. He had offered partnership. She looked at the man who had once spent every Wednesday waiting for the past. Now he stood before her with an unfinished house and no certainty except hope. "Yes," she said. They married the following spring. Lucy wore cream-colored silk that Maggie helped alter by hand. Henry Caldwell attended and brought a silver desk clock as a wedding gift. There was no bitterness between the men. Henry had recently become engaged to a lawyer's daughter in Denver and seemed entirely satisfied with the outcome. Lucy continued working at the depot. Within 3 years, the railroad officially named her station agent of Larkspur Junction. Travelers occasionally objected to taking instructions from a woman. They usually stopped after discovering she knew more about the railroad than they did. Caleb's ranch grew, so did their family. Their first daughter was named Eleanor, after Lucy's mother. Their second child, a boy, was named Edwin for Lucy's father. On Wednesdays, when the afternoon train approached, the children often ran to the platform. Caleb sometimes joined them, but he no longer stood beneath the clock searching every face. Maggie wrote regularly now. She visited when she could. The cedar box remained in Caleb's home, but its meaning had changed. It no longer held a reason to wait. It held a reminder that love sometimes survives distance, pride, and years of silence, but only if someone eventually finds the courage to speak. Many years later, when Lucy's hair had begun to silver, the railroad replaced the old telegraph system. A young employee asked whether she wanted to throw away the worn walnut key that had sat on her desk for decades. Lucy looked at the initials carved into its base. L.B. "No," she said. She carried it home. That evening, Caleb was sitting on the porch. Lucy placed the old telegraph key in his hand. "Do you remember making this?" "I remember ruining 2 pieces of good walnut before I got it right." 3. 2. I saw the scraps. Caleb sighed. 3. She sat beside him. In the distance, the Wednesday train whistled. Neither of them moved. Caleb reached for her hand. Once, that sound had meant waiting. Then it had meant fear. Then possibility. Now it was simply part of the landscape of a life they had built together. Some people spend years looking down the track for the person they believe is meant to arrive. The fortunate ones eventually notice who has been standing beside them all along. Sometimes the future begins when we stop waiting for the past to return and notice the people who have quietly stood beside us. Caleb and Lucy found happiness because they chose honesty, patience, and the courage to speak before another chance slipped away. Cherish the people who show up. Say what matters while you can. And remember that a good life is often built one small kindness at a time. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI for your entertainment, while also sharing a positive lesson about love, courage, and appreciating the people who truly care.